for inviting me down today. Had a look at the list before I came in here and see a few faces, so quite a daunting expert audience here to contend with. So hopefully what I'm going to talk about won't interfere with your lunchtime digestion too much. So really today, obviously, the title, I'm here to talk about community confidence. And certainly, confidence as a goal within PSNI and the service they deliver has taken, I would say, very much a centre stage under the Chief Constable Matt Baggett and the new 2020 policing strategy, along with what Matt Baggett as well calls these 250,000 moments of truth every year, or in other words, these contacts between members of the public and the PSNI on a yearly basis. But what I want to do today is really to attempt to look beyond what I'll go on to argue, and what I would argue are really broad brush contentions and assumptions as to confidence in the police, and through examining a range of research and empirical data, suggest some alternative measures and understandings of confidence in policing, which go beyond the metrics and the measures, as I've called them, which are consistently set forth by both the Policing Board and PSNI. So really, in terms of what I'm going to talk about today, just a very sort of brief outline. Firstly, I want to take at some of these contextual dynamics, really relating to the policing environment. So we'll have a look at how the policing environment looks at the moment. Secondly, I'll have a look at some of what is the empirical evidence relating to confidence in policing, both locally and internationally. There's quite a body of literature there. And finally, I'll go on to suggest some alternative measures for confidence in policing in Northern Ireland, which hopefully might more usefully capture the process, as I would argue today, which comprises confidence. So, just going to make sure this works. There we go. That's great. So really what I want to start off with as part of this discussion today is a quote from the Chief Constable back in 2010. And I've heard him use this in a variety of forms of police debate where he's been. And he simply states, for every negative encounter a person has, there will be required 14 positive counters to redress that balance. And while I'll return specifically to this contention later on, really what we need to do today, and hopefully what we'll get at, is digging a little deeper and explore some of the wider dynamics which underpin this notion of police contact and encounters with the public, not just generally, but specifically within Northern Ireland. Because in terms really of what constitutes confidence, I think it can only be conceived where we actually understand the policing landscape absolutely thoroughly, as part of what we'll come on to see is the process related to confidence, rather than simply seeing it as individual metrics or measures. And certainly an important starting point for any debate in policing and confidence is looking at this contextual landscape and examining the current state of policing by PSNI, really as a marker of where the police sit as part of community level of confidence in policing, and especially through community policing, or as Edgar rightly pointed out, policing with the community. And certainly at an operational level, and beyond some very positive developments under the Chief Constable and excellent pockets of good practice throughout the country, community policing as a means of engaging and tailoring and really, I suppose, anchoring PSNI service is not being delivered in the widespread fashion that the PSNI and the Policing Board would often suggest. And that relates specifically to Loyalist and Republican communities. And that's a well-worn issue, which I'm not certainly going to rehearse again today, but is nonetheless, it's a fact on the basis of research which is out there. But this is not necessarily, or even solely, the fault of PSNI, because today's discussion is absolutely not about having to go at anybody or blaming individuals or organisations. It's about understanding very clearly and very concisely the parameters of community confidence. So in this regard, we need to firstly recognise that successes in community policing in terms of working best where it's needed least do not necessarily negate the realities of perceived or actual deficits in policing faced by many Loyalist and Republican marginalised communities, which has manifested itself in terms of limited and also in some cases waning support and confidence in PSNI to deliver normal policing, whatever that actually is. We'll get on to that later. So this is our first point of reference in terms of where Policing Board statistics and PSNI discourse do not necessarily meet with the reality of policing faced at the community level as part of this context of policing. On a second point, we can also look, and again this is not to pick in particular organisations, we can also look to the district policing partnerships and their roles within the confidence process. And again, while there are excellent pockets of good practice, I have to say, beyond what is well documented difficulties in attracting community participation, or move what other people have called bean counting culture, rather than confidence building, a decade of community confidence in policing has been defined through statistical aggregations and measures, characterised through the DPP role. And I suppose, just to digress a little bit, the new PCSPs, this is where they must step up to the mark in terms of developing indicators which really relate to confidence, not just in the police, but policing much more broadly at community level. But returning to the main issue, this is another point of departure in terms of confidence in relation to where the successes of the DPPs clashes with the reality of community experiences of those on the ground. But again, not about blaming, not about finger pointing, just some objective contextual mapping of the dynamics underpinning our notions of confidence in policing across the country. I suppose thirdly as well, there's 4 parts to this very briefly. Thirdly, as part of a more process than product based approach to community confidence in policing, while much time and effort and attention has been devoted within the PSNI and the Northern Ireland Policing Board in terms of engagement with a range of different sections, whether loyalist, Republican, ethnic minority, LGBT, as they rightly should, little, if any, attention, apart from isolated pockets, has been paid to the process of confidence building in terms of engagement with the vibrant civil society structures which exist throughout the country. And is recognised certainly through Patton, through the Office of the Oversight Commissioner, through my own work, the strength of civil society, and specifically those groups and organisations who have a stake in policing at the local level, whether it's first line response, education, educational programmes, intervention, mediation, public order, parading, interface violence, environmental issues, restorative justice. There's a whole range there. But not only do you need a feature of our policing landscape, but also need to be a necessary feature as part of building an inclusive approach to confidence building. And indeed, I think such thinking on the development of processes has largely been absent from the policing debate, the only sort of exceptions being CJNI's recent inspection of the West Belfast Community Safety Forum. And this impacts directly on community confidence because of the fact their contributions are being overlooked. And there are important bridging roles for communities previously distanced from the police and the formal criminal justice mechanisms more generally. That role is not being fully organised. So this is another factor supposed to be considered as part of this contextual landscape. And finally, as part of, I suppose you could call this a very sort of brief topology of the confidence landscape, we also have conflicted narratives related to the ongoing dissident terrorist threat. And certainly, while the physical threat to PSNI and others cannot be underestimated in any shape or form, in terms of confidence, research and recent conversations as we had at the Change and Challenge conference at UU back in November are pointing to community concerns about the potential return to a securitisation agenda, the purchasing of more Land Rovers, and the defining policing successes through reductions in terrorist activity instead of being able to talk about community policing. Again, certainly not the fault of PSNI, they obviously have to deal with this. Because on the one hand, political and policing rhetoric is dominated, you just have to look in press and political discourse, it's dominated by contentions of peace, of normality, and the need for communities previously, I suppose, distanced from the policing landscape to actually get on board with this new beginning. Yet on the other hand, it's precisely those communities, mainly urban, loyalist, Republican communities, who are absorbing the costs of these colourful accounts of peace and policing, which ultimately impacts on what we understand as normal policing and laterally confidence. So suppose, what then you may ask, what I'm actually saying, what's the point of looking at this contextual landscape of policing, notions of community policing, of the policing structures, of civil society, of the terrorist threat? Well, what I want to do at this point is return to the quote I noted at the start of this discussion from the Chief Constable related to 14 positive contacts as providing a remedy for negative police encounters with the public. Because there is, in fact, certainly as far as I can discern, there is no empirical basis to substantiate this claim. And this is not to pick needlessly at the words or question the ideas of the Chief Constable, absolutely laudable, it's quite the opposite of that. But the Chief's well-rehearsed notion is really symptomatic of the fact we have no real research or institutional grasp of what confidence really means for communities across Northern Ireland. Because aside from the official statistics which paint one reality of policing confidence, which I'll come on to later on, and beyond some of the contextual issues I've just outlined very briefly there are whole areas of policing and criminology relevant to the debate which have yet to be seriously discussed or included in these sorts of arenas. And certainly as we move into another new era of policing, really sort of focused on community safety through the Department of Justice, we need to be very clear on these issues to provide a solid base upon which we can actually move forward. Because firstly, if we examine this notion of positive contacts, I think the antecedents of the Chief Constable's quote, it actually came from a study by the policing academic Wesley Scogan back in 2006 in this paper entitled Asymmetrical Encounters Between the Police and the Public. And really the crux of this research was that negative encounters between PSNI officers and members of the public have 14 times more impact than positive encounters. But crucially, positive encounters between police officers and the public is not or are not statistically significant from zero. And across time and across countries, this is consistent with similar studies and evidence related to public confidence in government agencies more generally. And even if we did take the Chief's notion to its logical conclusion, I suppose, on the basis of the 9,592 allegations and complaints put into the Police Ombudsman for 2010-11, it would require the PSNI to do nearly 135,000 good encounters, whatever that actually looks like. So I think we need to get something a little more tangible and a little more realistic as part of this notion of confidence. So that's the first issue. And secondly, and probably more importantly, for understanding what we don't fully understand about community confidence in policing, and in terms of the brief confidence topology I talked about, what criminological research also points to is the fact that confidence in the police is actually shaped by general attitudes or influenced through the contextual factors I talked about. So confidence in police is influenced through contextual factors which in turn affect people's evaluations of encounters with the police, not the other way around. That's what any of the criminological research actually looks to. So what I'm saying is drives within PSNI, within the policing board for individualistic community type measures of confidence on the basis of the evidence are at best inaccurate records of confidence, especially when we don't understand the wider factors which do actually influence confidence, which you want to turn on to. And certainly away from any of the Northern Ireland specific issues, research also points to three key factors at the community level. So if I jumped on one too far there. Sorry, people see sick there. Sorry. Again, sorry, away from our Northern Ireland factors, there are three key factors which influence perceptions of confidence in policing, but which we don't currently capture in Northern Ireland. And those are, very specifically, crime and disorder problems, fear of crime, and neighbourhood satisfaction levels. And again, this is in relation to the environment that shapes people's evaluation of police encounters. So in this sense, while the board's current satisfaction survey, it does provide a reasonably, I suppose, consistent or an approximate indicator of confidence over time, without any of it taking measurement of any of these indicators or the disaggregation of confidence down to, ideally down to the council output area, our current measures of confidence are fundamentally limited. Compounded, where the current measures of confidence, they're actually extrapolated from randomised household surveys. So we just simply don't know what's at the bottom of those. And indeed, that's before we even get into weighting about confidence in policing based on the individual characteristics of the people actually surveyed, which includes personal and vicarious experience of policing, age, socio-demographic status. So there are a range of factors there which we don't currently measure. And some of you may ask, well, does this really matter? Does it actually matter? Well, when we dig a little deeper into the process of confidence, British Crime Survey data actually suggests that people with no recent contact with police generally tend to have more positive outlooks outlooks on policing as delivered at the local level. And for the purposes of what we currently know or don't know, that's absolutely vital. because certainly Northern Ireland Policing Board surveys of the last number of years has consistently indicated that 72 to 75% of respondents in those surveys have had no recent contact with PSNI. So on that basis, I think there has to be even an extra degree of caution in there. So having considered then, I mean, just to suppose very briefly, the range of issues and research related to confidence in policing, albeit in the short time that we have today, where then does this actually leave us for the confidence picture, rather than just necessarily picking holes or looking at the key issues? And in spite of what, at face value, might actually seem a gloomy picture, it's actually quite a positive one for PSNI. Because looking at the factors which research points to influencing confidence in policing, many of these are actually outside the control of the PSNI as an organisation, whether it's some of those neighbourhood dynamics, the satisfaction levels, or some of the fear of crime issues. A lot of those generally tend to lie outside the strict remit of police work. And I think this is the interesting bit, as I'll come back to in more detail in the conclusion, because Patton never envisaged that policing would end up based on bureaucratic metrics of policing. So in this regard, I mean, the first decade of policing here, there was always this feeling, I suppose, as I've said many times, that if policing could somehow be got right, the other pieces of the jigsaw would fall into place. So the next decade, in terms of this positive picture for PSNI, the next decade towards 2020 must actually be about turning our focus away from PSNI as a sort of nom de plume for all the societal troubles that we have, and looking to policing more broadly conceived, where a wide range of stakeholders with responsibilities for policing in its broadest sense will contribute to this broad, much wider process of community confidence, not confidence in the police in isolation. But at present, I think we're almost actually perversely constrained just by the sheer volume of police-focused confidence measure. We've got measures from the Northern Ireland Policing Board, we've got DPP surveys, we've got police ombudsman that they play in there as well in terms of allegations and complaints. We've got the Northern Ireland Crime Survey, and also we have PSNI in terms of some of those the current system of bringing back people who've had encounters with the police by that external commercial body. But none of those measures, and there are many, none of those measures give us a sophisticated enough picture of confidence in policing to any significant social, geographic or demographic level of granularity. Nor does it give us, or is weighted to, factor in the variety of community and individual processes which impact upon confidence and perceptions of policing, pretty much regardless of what the PSNI as an organisation do. A wide range of factors outside of their control. So really, what I'm saying, in considering the current state of what we know about confidence and moving towards some sort of broader concluding what should we actually do observations, what I want to do is take a step back